Welcome back, everybody. Today we're going to do a deep dive into something that I think you've probably encountered in your own exploration of faith. The kind of constant push and pull between tradition and independent understanding.
Yeah.
And we're going to be looking at this through the lens of a specific passage from the Quran.
Okay.
Surah Al-Baqarah, verses 170 and 171.
These verses are really fascinating because they address, a phenomenon that's just as relevant today as it was centuries ago.
Right.
This tendency to blindly follow the practices of our forefathers,
Yeah.
even when they're presented with divine guidance.
Yeah, it's that classic line, right?
Exactly.
Well, we've always done it this way. It's almost like a reflex.
It is.
But what's interesting here is that the Quran doesn't just dismiss this mindset.
Right.
It actually uses a really powerful analogy
Yeah.
to illustrate why this kind of blind following is problematic.
Exactly. The verses compare those who follow without understanding to those who can hear a call, but can't grasp its meaning.
Right.
They're likened to animals who react solely to sound without the capacity for deeper comprehension.
That's a striking image.
It is.
It really highlights the importance of engaging our intellect.
Yeah.
And not just blindly following the herd,
Yeah.
so to speak.
Absolutely.
What I find so intriguing is that the Quran doesn't just say, don't follow tradition.
Right.
It specifically emphasizes the importance of seeking knowledge from the right sources.
Absolutely. From an Islamic perspective,
Yeah.
the Quran and the Sunnah, the Prophet Muhammad's
Right.
teachings and practices are the ultimate sources of guidance.
Okay.
They're the foundations upon which all other understanding and practice should be built.
So it's about grounding our beliefs and actions in something more than just habit
Yes.
or what we've been told.
Absolutely.
Makes me think of how important it is to verify information these days, to check the credibility of sources before accepting something as true.
Precisely, it's about cultivating that discerning mindset.
Yeah.
But I'm sure you've also encountered the complexities of this issue.
Oh, yeah.
Especially when it comes to navigating the respect we have for our elders and their traditions.
Absolutely.
It's a balance, isn't it?
It absolutely is. How do we reconcile that deep respect for our elders
Yeah.
with the responsibility to seek knowledge and potentially question practices
Right.
that might not align with what we're learning from the Quran and Sunnah? That tension feels very real for a lot of people, I think.
It is a real tension, and it's one that many grapple with.
Yeah.
Islam undoubtedly emphasizes respect for elders,
Of course.
but it also calls for critical evaluation of practices.
Okay.
Especially in light of the Quran and Sunnah.
Right.
The key is to understand the origins of traditions and to ensure they align with the core principles of the faith.
So it's about understanding the why behind the what.
Yes.
Not just blindly following, but engaging in that deeper exploration.
Absolutely.
And I imagine that leads us to the concept of innovations in Islam,
Yes.
which you mentioned earlier.
Innovations, or bid'ah in Arabic,
Okay.
refer to practices introduced into the religion that have no basis in the Quran or Sunnah.
Got it.
This is where that critical evaluation becomes crucial.
Yeah.
It's about discerning what's authentically rooted in the teachings and what might have crept in over time without a proper foundation.
That distinction feels really important,
It is.
especially when you consider the potential consequences
Yeah.
of blindly following these innovations. What does the text tell us about those consequences?
The text highlights several key concerns. It points out that blindly following innovations can lead to wasted effort and a lack of spiritual reward.
Right.
It also suggests that it can, in some cases, lead individuals astray.
Wow.
From the true path of Islam, the emphasis is always on aligning our actions with genuine knowledge and understanding, not blind adherence.
It makes me think of building something on a shaky foundation. Might look good initially, but it won't stand the test of time.
Right.
But how do we move beyond just avoiding blind following?
Yeah.
How do we actually cultivate that deeper understanding?
The text points us towards a beautiful concept.
Okay.
The Islamic emphasis on using our intellect and reflecting on the purpose of creation. It's a call to engage our minds, question assumptions, and actively seek knowledge from authentic sources.
That's so powerful.
It is.
It's not about passively accepting what we're told, but about actively engaging in a process of learning and discovery.
Absolutely.
I'm reminded of the Prophet Muhammad's own experience of seeking solitude and revelation.
Yeah.
He wasn't just accepting the status quo, he was actively searching for truth and understanding.
That's a great connection.
Cool.
The Prophet's example beautifully illustrates this principle.
Yeah.
He wasn't afraid to question, to seek answers, and to challenge existing norms.
Yeah.
And that same spirit of inquiry should be alive in all of us as we navigate our own journeys of faith and understanding.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. And that's a critical point, this idea of active seeking.
Right.
You know, it's not enough to just avoid blind following.
Okay.
We need to be proactive in seeking knowledge, questioning assumptions, and refining our understanding.
You've touched on the importance of the Quran and Sunnah as those authentic sources.
Yeah.
But within Islamic scholarship, there are different schools of thought and interpretations.
Right.
How does that factor into this idea of independent understanding?
That's a really important nuance.
Okay.
The existence of different schools of thought within Islam, each with their own methodologies and perspectives, actually reinforces the need for independent understanding. It means that even within a framework of shared beliefs, there's room for intellectual exploration and debate.
So it's not about everyone coming to the same exact conclusion, but about engaging in that process of thoughtful inquiry and arriving at an understanding that's both grounded in the sources and personally meaningful.
Precisely. It's about recognizing that faith isn't a monolithic entity. There's a richness and depth to Islamic scholarship that invites us to delve deeper, to grapple with different interpretations, and to ultimately arrive at a nuanced understanding that resonates with our own intellectual and spiritual journeys.
That makes me think of the concept of ijtihad.
Yes.
The process of independent legal reasoning in Islam.
Exactly.
It's not just about blindly following rulings, but about understanding the principles behind them and applying them thoughtfully to new situations.
That's a perfect example.
Yeah.
The very concept of ijtihad highlights the importance that Islam places on independent thought and reasoned judgment.
Okay.
It recognizes that as times change and new challenges arise, we can't just rely on static interpretations. We need to engage our minds, consult the relevant texts and principles, and arrive at rulings that are both grounded in the tradition and relevant to our contemporary context.
But I imagine that navigating those different schools of thought and interpretations can be tricky. How do we, as individuals, determine which interpretations resonate with us or feel most authentic to the spirit of Islam?
It's a process, and there's no one-size-fits-all answer.
Okay.
But some key elements include studying with knowledgeable scholars, engaging with different perspectives within Islamic thought, and critically evaluating the reasoning and evidence behind different interpretations. It's also about developing a personal connection with the Quran and Sunnah, studying them deeply, and seeking guidance through prayer and reflection.
So it's a multifaceted approach that involves both external learning and that internal process of reflection and spiritual growth.
Exactly. It's a lifelong journey. And the more we engage in that process of learning and reflection, the more equipped we'll be to navigate the complexities of faith and tradition. It's about developing that intellectual and spiritual muscle, so to speak.
That makes sense. But let's go back to this idea of innovations in Islam. The term itself seems to suggest a clear distinction between what's considered authentic practice and what's not. But in practice, can those lines get blurry? How do we even begin to identify an innovation in a way that avoids subjective judgment?
That's a really important question. You're right. The lines can get blurry. And this is where it becomes crucial to understand the reasoning behind why certain practices are considered innovations. It's not simply about novelty or change. The core concern is about practices that contradict or undermine the established teachings of the Quran and Sunnah, or that introduce elements that alter the fundamental tenets of the faith.
So it's not just about something being new, but about whether it has a solid basis in the foundational text. And aligns with the core principles and spirit of Islam.
Precisely. And this is where scholarly consensus and the guidance of qualified Islamic scholars play an important role. They can help us understand the historical context, the theological arguments, and the criteria that have been established over centuries to determine what falls within the bounds of acceptable practice and what veers into the realm of innovation.
That emphasizes the importance of seeking knowledge.
Yes.
From those who have dedicated themselves to studying these matters.
Absolutely.
It's not about isolating ourselves and trying to figure everything out on our own,
right,
but about tapping into the collective wisdom of the scholarly tradition.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing that we stand on the shoulders of giants, so to speak.
Yeah.
There's a wealth of knowledge and insight that's been accumulated over centuries of Islamic scholarship.
Right.
And by engaging with that tradition, we can refine our own understanding and avoid pitfalls that might lead us down paths that stray from the essence of the faith.
It's fascinating to see how this discussion about tradition and independent understanding ties into so many other core concepts within Islam.
It is.
It's not just a standalone issue, but something that intersects with our understanding of scholarship, jurisprudence, and even our personal relationship with the divine.
Exactly. It highlights how interconnected and dynamic Islamic thought is.
Okay.
It's not about rigid adherence to rules, but about a constant process of seeking knowledge, refining our understanding, and striving to live our lives in accordance with the divine will, as expressed through the teachings of the Quran and the example of the Prophet.
It reminds me of something you said earlier about faith not being static.
Yeah.
It's a journey, a process of growth and evolution.
Absolutely.
And that evolution requires us to engage our minds, to ask questions, and to grapple with these complex issues in a way that deepens our understanding and strengthens our connection with our faith.
That's beautifully put, and I think that's a powerful takeaway for all of us. Regardless of where we are on our own spiritual journeys, the pursuit of knowledge, the willingness to question, and the courage to seek deeper understanding, these are all essential elements of living a truly meaningful and fulfilling life of faith.
It's like we're constantly calibrating our internal compass, right? Using both the fixed stars of tradition and the dynamic readings of our own understanding to kind of chart a course through life.
That's a wonderful analogy.
Yeah.
And just like navigating a ship, it requires a balance of skill, knowledge, and intuition.
Absolutely.
We need to be aware of the potential pitfalls, the shifting currents, and the uncharted territories that lie ahead.
And speaking of uncharted territories, I think it's important to acknowledge that this idea of balancing tradition and independent understanding isn't just an internal struggle.
It's not.
It plays out in our interactions with the wider world as well.
Absolutely. It impacts how we engage with other faiths, cultures, and even secular ideas. We're living in an increasingly interconnected world. And that interconnectedness brings with it both opportunities and challenges.
It's like we're constantly encountering different maps of reality. Each with its own landmarks and boundaries and points of orientation. How do we navigate those differences without getting lost in a sea of relativism or clinging rigidly to our own map?
That's where the principles of critical thinking and respectful dialogue become even more crucial. We need to be able to engage with other perspectives without compromising our own core values. It's about finding those points of connection, those shared values that can bridge the gaps between different worldviews.
So it's not about erasing differences or pretending they don't exist, but about finding ways to build bridges of understanding and respect across those differences. But how do we do that in a world where those differences often feel so vast and so entrenched?
It starts with a willingness to listen deeply. To truly understand the other person's perspective, even if we don't agree with it. It also involves a commitment to seeking common ground, to finding those shared values and aspirations that can unite us despite our differences.
It sounds like it requires a lot of humility.
It does.
A willingness to step outside of our own comfort zones. And to truly engage with the other. But that can feel risky, can't it?
It can.
What if that engagement challenges our own deeply held beliefs or exposes us to ideas that make us uncomfortable?
It can feel risky, but that risk is often accompanied by great rewards. It's in those moments of discomfort, those encounters with the unfamiliar, that we have the opportunity to grow and evolve. It's about expanding our horizons, deepening our empathy, and ultimately arriving at a more nuanced and compassionate understanding of the world.
So it's about embracing that discomfort, that sense of being stretched and challenged as a catalyst for growth. It's about recognizing that true learning often happens at the edges of our comfort zones.
Precisely. And it's important to remember that this journey of balancing tradition and independent understanding isn't a solitary one. We're all in this together, navigating the complexities of faith, culture, and identity in an ever-changing world.
That brings me to my final question.
Okay.
If there's one key takeaway from this whole deep dive, something that our listener can carry with them as they continue on their own journey, what would it be?
I think it would be this: embrace the tension.
Oh.
The tension between tradition and independent understanding is not something to be feared or resolved.
Right.
It's a dynamic force that can propel us towards greater knowledge, wisdom, and compassion. So lean into that tension, engage with it thoughtfully, and trust that it will lead you towards a more meaningful and fulfilling expression of your faith.
That's a beautiful thought to end on.
I think so.
To embrace the tension, to see it not as a struggle, but as an opportunity for growth and transformation.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for guiding us through this complex and fascinating topic.
It's been my pleasure.
And to our listener, we hope this deep dive has sparked your curiosity, challenged your assumptions, and inspired you to continue on your own journey of balancing tradition and independent understanding. Thank you all for listening.
Thank you.